Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I hope you are doing well. Today is June 10th, and Bitcoin is sitting at 69,500. And I'm going to tell you in this live why Bitcoin's price is not to be trusted. So, without further ado, let's get started. As always, this is not financial advice, so be sure to do your own due diligence before making any investing decisions. So, big week ahead. We have a number of pretty impactful macroeconomic data coming out. We have CPI inflation data on Wednesday. That's, I suppose, the big one. And then we have the Fed speech, interest rate decision. Not too impactful, or although a lot of people uh, pay a lot of attention to what the Fed says, I don't really, because I don't really think they know what's coming down the pike, and therefore their words should be discounted. They've been proven wrong time and time again, and they have a pretty consistent track record of flip flopping. So I don't really pay much attention to what they say, but a lot of investors do. You have the FOMC projection, same as the Fed speech, impactful, but I don't really use it or rely on it that heavily. We have PPI inflation the day after on Thursday, and then we have consumer sentiment data on Friday. So a pretty loaded week in terms of macroeconomic data points, and so expect volatility in the markets. As it relates to the Fed's rate decision, there's basically uh, no chance that the Fed is going to cut rates on Wednesday. The market here is assigning a 0.6% chance. It's probably less than that. The market's probably being generous here. If you go out to September, you can see basically a 50-50 split with a slight edge to no cut being priced in. These percentages will change probably dramatically if the inflation numbers that come out on Wednesday and then the PPI on Thursday come out to be very different than expectations. Just to take account of where we are in terms of our fight against inflation, it does seem like we're making progress, but it's not linear progress. So we do seem to sometimes be taking two steps forward, one step back. So if you look at the red line here, the blue line, by the way, is just the S&P, and it's been steadily chugging along through diverse macroeconomic environments. If you look at the red, you can see that it spiked in 2022, 2023, and then we were able to get a handle on inflation. So the red represents inflation. But at the in the last couple of months, we have seen some retracement in terms of our progress on inflation. We've gotten a few readings that were hotter than expected. So a cooler than expected inflation reading will be very much welcome news for the market, and the market is likely to react rather positively to that. Now, if you look at inflation on a multi-year basis, now we're only trained and used to looking at inflation on a annual basis, because if you look at it at a multi-year uh, time frame, it's rather discouraging and rather scary. So if you look at home prices, for example, home ownership costs since 2020, they've spiked 26% across the United States. Some places like Utah spiking as high as 44% just since 2020, which is tragic if you're living in Utah or you wanted to live in Utah. Idaho, Hawaii, Montana, basically some of the most beautiful states in the union, have had the highest rates of home ownership expense inflation just since 2020. By the way, we're not talking about a long time ago, just since 2020. And nationwide, the average is basically a quarter higher today than it was just 4 years ago, which is um, pretty tough on many homeowners. And if you look at groceries, they're not any better. So if you look at something like a dozen eggs, on average, went from a buck 50 to $3, so 100% price increase since 2020. Now, I can tell you that $3 for a dozen eggs actually seems quite cheap. Now especially if you're looking for like free range uh, dozen eggs, you're looking at north of $5 at least. So $3 is actually being quite generous. If you look at other items, I mean, lettuce is up 50%. If you look at milk is up 50%, bananas up 50%. So really, I mean, should be thinking about investing in inflation. And that's why we Bitcoin, as they say. Now, unemployment is also starting to go up higher, albeit by a modest amount. So unemployment is now at 4%, which raises the risk of stagflation, so stagnation and inflation. Um, that being said, we're still much lower than the uh, the levels that we've been at previous recessions. So if you look at 2008, 2009, we were much higher, closer to um, 6% on our unemployment number. And even if you go back to 2000, 2001, we were at higher levels than where we are right now, albeit by not too much. But it's still getting investors' imagination going with regards to, hey, what if unemployment continues to rise and inflation is not brought under control? So that gets a lot of people very nervous. Now, the reason why I mentioned that the Bitcoin price should not be trusted is the following. So, if you look at the Bitcoin ETFs in the last 7 days, they've had a very, very strong 7 trading days in terms of inflows. Even GBTC has seen inflows. I don't know why people are buying into GBTC, but they are. I don't know why, considering their fees, but perhaps they're the only option that some people have, or they just don't know about the alternatives and the differences in fees. But $2 billion has flown into the Bitcoin ETFs in the last 7 trading days. And yet, if you notice, the price of Bitcoin hasn't done much of anything. So, why is that? Well, shorts have now uh, reached a record level. So, people who are betting against the price of Bitcoin have reached a record level. And now you've heard me talk on this channel before about how shorts are essentially manipulating the market by creating artificial supply. So when something is borrowed and sold, the owner is not putting it up for sale. So you're creating artificial supply for that thing, and eventually, what's going to happen is that that artificial supply cannot go on indefinitely. What matters is what is the true supply and what is the true demand. And true supply is determined by the owners of the asset, not by someone who borrowed the asset and is putting it on the market. So, what's happening right now is that you have a shift in fundamentals on the demand side. So there's real demand for Bitcoin, but the supply on the market right now is very much artificial. It is short term, it's not long term. Eventually, that short term supply is going to yield itself to the real, actual supply that the market determines, that the owners of the asset determine. And with demand having risen, this is going to cause the price of Bitcoin to pop like a balloon that you're pushing underwater. Eventually, the harder you push downwards, the higher the pop upwards. And that is inevitable. So I would not trust this 69,500 price that you're seeing next to Bitcoin. I think had it not been for shorts, which are again artificially manipulating the price through creating artificial supply, had it not been for the shorts, then the price would have been much, much higher. So that's why if you focus on the fundamentals and you see this, this is an opportunity, I think, to accumulate more uh, while the price remains artificially suppressed. Again, not financial advice. This is what I think. If you are not a PIF member yet, do make sure to become a member and join our community of halal-conscious investors. Follow our portfolios, move for move, trade for trade. With that, let's take some question. Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Oh, nice to see you, Abdullah from Mecca. Make sure if you're doing Hajj, make sure to remember us in your dua. That would be really appreciated. Very underwhelmed by Solana. Seemed very promising, and I know you're a fan. Are you still? Well, I think the question you need to ask yourself is why are you underwhelmed? Is it because of any data points, or are you underwhelmed by the price action? Looking at price action is not investing. Look at the fundamentals. Are the daily usage stats improving, or how are they moving? Are they losing ground to other layer one solutions? That's the question you should ask, not the price action. I have a feeling, and maybe I'm wrong, but I have a feeling that if the price right now was 250, you would not feel underwhelmed. So the alpha, the gain that you're going to make in investing comes when you see when you don't follow the sentiment of the market. Solana is down, the price may be underwhelming, but the fundamentals may be improving, and in which case that's your cue to buy. Are we seeing an increase in defaults? Yes, we have seen increases in defaults. The consumer is running out of savings. They're using credit, and there is an increase in defaults. We haven't reached historically unprecedented levels in default, but it is something to keep an eye on. Any other solution to inflation aside from interest rates? That's a good question. I think the entire system needs to be rethought. It really doesn't make. First of all, obviously, my position on interest rates, but I don't really think you need the Fed to determine what interest rates are. I mean, can't two banks who are dealing with one another agree on what interest rate they want to use? But that's just working within the system. I think the entire system needs to be changed. Certainly, it doesn't make sense for currency to be created through debt. It doesn't make sense for the Fed to actually charge interest whenever it creates money. This is absurd. I think anyone who really understands how the monetary system works would agree. But my hope is, I'm optimistic that more and more people, as inflation becomes more and more an acute problem, more and more brain cells are going to be focused on finding a solution to this. I think that any system that allows debt, interest-bearing debt, will end up following the steps that we've seen in terms of the system eventually overburdening itself with debt. Certainly, a democracy that has access to debt, is okay with debt from an ethical perspective, will end up bankrupting itself because people will always choose whichever candidate is offering more benefits. And so people in government will, in order to maintain their jobs, will indebt the country in order to offer more and more benefits to their constituents until the country is bankrupt. So, without a prohibition on interest bearing debt, any democracy will end up sooner or later bankrupting itself. So, the solution here is to, I think, take a page from Islamic economics and ban interest bearing debt altogether. Uh, I, I, I think this is the fundamental shift in policy that would save us. Um, Wa alaikum salam, brother. Why cannot shorts sustain themselves indefinitely? Well, because taking out a short position costs money, and so you have to pay, interest on your short position. And when the fundamentals are becoming, and by the way, when shorts are at the records that they are, the interest is even more expensive. So it costs them money to maintain their position over time, and so eventually they have to either close their position or be forced to close their position. And then when you have the fundamentals on the other side improving, that makes the possibility of them being forced to close their position even more acute. Uh, Anything artificial, really, in the market is not sustainable. So this is why when the Prophet, peace be upon him, was approached and asked to put price limits on things, he refused and he said, this is something that the market determines, because he understands that this is not something that's sustainable. If you put a price limit, you end up doing wrong by either the seller or the buyer, and eventually it's unsustainable and the market wins out. So I think, Islam is one of the very first economic sort of uh, theories that really promotes market forces, because they are, what is sustainable, what does right by the most number of people for most things. I'm not talking about cases where there's a monopoly on an item. That's obviously, a monopoly is outside of market forces, is an unnatural thing. And or things that are essential, those are instances where, okay, I think there's a case to be made for the government stepping in and making sure that it's provided for everyone. But in normal circumstances, the market is the one that should determine. I've talked about meme coins before. Basically, very quickly, I don't think that we should be imposing, or we should be calling things halal and haram um, loosely. I don't think that there's, as it relates to meme coins, there's no stipulation in Islam, in the Quran or the Hadith, that says you cannot buy something for, a certain for, because it's, a meme, or you cannot buy something because you cannot buy something that you don't intend on using. There's no such stipulation. You can buy things as basically collector's items, or things that for the sole reason that you think you can turn around and sell them for more. And I've mentioned before that I think meme coins, at their base level, any meme coin has the following utility, which is that you can send it to someone else with very little fees, typically, especially meme coins on Solana. You can send them to someone and across the globe with very minimal fees. So there is some value there. It's not true to say they have no value. So yeah, I'm generally comfortable with meme coins. What Islamic ETF has the highest gain? Um, Perhaps I'll do a review. It's been a while since I've reviewed Islamic ETFs, so I think perhaps it's time to do another review. Do you see any risk in countries banning Bitcoin? I think uh, Possibility of that has decreased substantially, considering now the Bitcoin ETFs have been approved, and a lot of people have poured a lot of money into these Bitcoin ETFs. It would be political suicide, basically, for a politician to try to ban Bitcoin ETFs, and therefore it's increasingly a remote possibility that any ban will be affected. At least in the United States. Other countries, it's certainly possible. Altcoins look more bearish. What's opinion? Yeah, so it's that time where you have to just uh, um, go through a lull in activity and a lull in gains in altcoins, and they go through fits and starts, and this is pretty natural. So you have to have patience. If you have an altcoin that you think has merit to it, then perhaps you should be thinking now about buying more. But this is nothing unusual as it relates to altcoins. You have to have patience. The markets are a mechanism for transferring value from the impatient to the patient. So make sure that you are on the right side of that transfer. If you enjoyed this live, do leave a like, hit the notification bell so you know when we go live again. Really appreciate it. And until next time, take care of yourself. Assalamu alaikum, and peace be upon you all.